And frankly, I started off being very skeptical about NLP. And I actually came across the NLP about 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And at that time, I was working as a teacher and as a psychotherapist. And I also had training as a nurse. And as a psychotherapist, I knew that all the fundamental learnings about psychotherapy had been made by maybe the 1940s or at least the 1950s, and that there really wasn't anything else to know about that, you know. And what had happened since then were just the add-on pieces. And so I felt fairly smug about that, fairly confident that we knew the basics and it was just a matter of developing details. And that was when I read my first book on NLP. And then I discovered that what I'd had was actually a thing that we call in NLP premature closure. And that is that, some of you know that premature closure can be almost as bad as premature, well anyway, it can be a nuisance. And so the thing is that by the time I discovered that, I realized that in fact there was a lot more to learn. There's a lot to learn here, you know. And that was a really valuable realization. Because for me, NLP has radically changed the way that I understand not just psychotherapy, but also the way that I understand healthcare and also the way that I understand education. And I hope over the next couple of days to give you a sense of how exciting it is to be involved in that process of change. NLP isn't just another way of doing therapy or just another way of doing learning or just another way of doing healthcare. It's really, in a sense, a whole new field. It's a totally new field of understanding about what's going on with human beings. And it was developed, first of all, in America, interestingly, by a group of people, in particular by Leslie Cameron Bandler, by John Grinder, by Richard Bandler, and those three people were studying some people who they recognized as being excellent communicators. Now, I want to tell you something about this. When people like Freud developed their theories about what's going on with human beings, Freud studied people who were unhappy with their life. And he worked out a theory about what's going on with people by studying those people who weren't doing too well. Now, just have a think about this. If you were wanting to learn about macrame, let's say, would you go to the people who ended up with a big tangle of knots and work out a theory of macrame? That wouldn't work, would it? The way to learn about it would be to find those people who are the best in the world at doing macrame, work out how they do it, and then teach what they were doing. And that was the idea that the developers of NLP had. Find who's doing it well, learn from them. So they went to various people. They went to some of the people who developed linguistics, like Watzlawick. They went to Virginia Satir, who was probably, she's often called the grandmother of family therapy and was probably the person singly most important for the development of family therapy. They went to Fritz Perls, who was a developer of Gestalt therapy. They went to these people because they were excellent communicators. And when they worked with people, people change. So they went to Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was a medical doctor and he was a hypnotherapist. And he seemed to have an amazing way of enabling people to change even when they had what were considered to be incurable medical conditions. And they also checked back over the research from earlier this century that had been done in the field of psychology by people like Ivan Pavlov. And for some of you, the name Pavlov will ring a bell. And what they did was they studied these people's excellence. And they were interested in working out, now, what do these people have in common? What do people who are doing excellently have in common? And they actually found that there were some things to learn. So they organized that into some models. But I'd like you to know something here. The things that they learned from those people, the particular skills, the particular techniques, those are just techniques. And that's not what NLP is. NLP is this process of finding people who are really good at something, and it could be you, and learning from those people how they do it. That process is called modeling. And it's based on an attitude of, I guess, curiosity. Now, the funny thing is, you know, that those people who were doing really well, had actually been doing really well for a number of years without anyone really asking that question, how do they do it? So the stages then, as you may know, are, first of all, when I'm helping someone change, I get in a resourceful state. Secondly, I establish rapport with the person. Thirdly, I help them specify what their outcome is, what it is that they want out of the session as a positive result. Next, I open up their model of the world so that they understand that it's possible to achieve this. And I do all of that before I do the official change process. After the official change process, I verify for this person that the change has happened, and I invite them to future pace or think into the future about the change that's happened. Each of these steps is an important part of how change occurs, and just to do this leading process here would not work in the way that most people think NLP works. So if we study someone who's exceptionally good at NLP, then we'll find that they go through these steps. And that includes the developers of NLP. One of the places where Tad James initially modelled his general model of therapy was looking at what Richard Bandler did. And in your notes you'll see there that there's a summary of what Richard Bandler does in one of the pieces of work that has been recorded in his book on magic in action. And that's where he was working with a woman about an issue of an anticipatory loss. So you might want to have a look for that sheet. Okay, so it's one that says anticipatory loss, Richard Bandler's use of resolve. In this process, Richard Bandler is going to be working with a woman who has panic attacks. She has this anxiety that happens when she anticipates that someone in her life is going to be lost to her. So this person fails to arrive home on time, then she would be able to do this panic. Now, the very first comment that Richard makes to this woman, Susan, is to say, okay, Susan, now why don't you tell me what it is that you would like? I don't know. We just got brought here and wired up, so you have to give me a hint. Now, one of the interesting things about this is, in a way, Richard Bandler at the start here is asking for her outcome. In another way, what he's doing is he is making clear the relationship that we have. And I think that's the most important thing he's doing at that moment. He's making it clear the relationship that he will have with her is that he knows some processes to do with her, but he's not a mind reader. He cannot step into her mind and magically change it inside. And that's an important part for me of being in a resourceful state. That's why, for me, I'm reluctant to use the word therapist or counsellor when I'm talking about my work using NLP, because I do not consider that I am healing someone else or even counselling them in some way about what they should do, so much as I'm being a consultant. And as a consultant, I know how to do some processes, and I ask them, you tell me what it is you want, and I'll consult with you and give you some ideas about how you could change that. And that's part of me maintaining a resourceful state. Another way of describing this in psychology terms is to say, I'm clear about the problem ownership. I know that I do not own this problem the person is talking about, that they, in fact, are the one who owns it and needs to make changes to suit them. So that's the very first thing Richard Bandler says to her. He essentially says, the situation here is you have something you want to change, you're in charge of that, I know the processes I do, but you know your brain. The next thing he does is he establishes rapport. And by establishing rapport here, I mean that he in fact talks with her about what it is that's going on for her and restates it for her. So Susan says, it's a fear of losing friendships or close relationships. Even when I anticipate a loss that isn't real, I get a panic attack. And Richard says, so the situation I'm worried about being in is one of anticipating and thinking about the loss. So he's just restating at this stage, and he's checking his understanding, building what we in NLP terms call rapport. He then gets her to be much more specific about the outcome. He says, if you would have distance in those situations, how would you know you had it? And so Susan describes in detail what her outcome is, what she would like to feel like when she no longer has anticipatory loss. She says, well, I believe I wouldn't feel those feelings. I'd have confidence, self-confidence. I could say to myself, well, they're not here now, but that doesn't mean you've lost them. It doesn't really matter. Maybe something happened. And also, so what if they don't show up? You can go on. So she describes in detail her sensory-specific outcome,
What would she say to herself? What would she feel like in a positive way if she got what she wanted? Now, Richard Bandler then points out to her that she is capable of changing that. So he opens up her model of the world. He says about her panic, "You've obviously mastered this. By the way, do you know this is an accomplishment?" She says, "What, you mean to master the panic's an accomplishment?" And he says, "Well, I bet a lot of people here couldn't panic." She says, "Not like I do anyway." So at that point, he's making it clear to her, if she's in charge of this panic, if it's something that she has become an expert at, then of course it's something that she could do something different about. And it's only after that that he does the leading process, which you would recognise in NLP terms as a swish. He gets her to make a big, bright picture of the thing that causes her to feel the panic, the picture that causes her to feel the panic, which is imagining that this person had a car crash and then she's left alone. And then he has a tiny little picture of her, such a resourceful her that this would totally solve the issue of panicking. And he has that little picture become bigger and brighter so that it fills the entire screen, while the other picture of the thing that used to cause the panic disappears and fades away. Okay, so he does that with her several times very quickly, and that is the official NLP change process he's doing. He's instructing her to rapidly change the submodalities in such a way that the brain locks that in place. Now, at that point, he asks her to go ahead and look at that panic that she used to have and see if you can hold it, he says. Now, what he's doing at that time is actually testing, has this changed in her brain? And this is important because he's verifying to her that something has happened different. She says, "It's hard. I just keep getting a white screen instead of it working." And he says, "What do you mean?" She says, "I'm having trouble doing it." So he has asked her to be specific and state, "No, the way it was before we started, before you did that change process, I can't do now." So he then says, "Try it once more." She says, "I can't do it, I'm sure." And he says, "Well, you told me at the start, if you change this, it will change your whole life. So now you're going to obviously have to live up to your promise." And she says, "Well, yes, it will. It'll change everything." So he's getting her to think into the future and check that this will be okay. So that's the structure of what he's doing there. It seems clear to me that when someone is successfully using NLP, they tend to go through these stages. Maybe not as precisely, maybe not in exactly that order, maybe they move from one to another and back again a little. But basically this is the process, and my favourite interest in NLP is integration, and that means integration inside a person and conflict resolution between people. Well, yeah, there are several patterns that I modelled from spiritual teachers, and one of the most exciting things has been to find several spiritual teachers using the same process, work out how it works, describe it in a way that someone could do in 5 or 10 minutes, and then get feedback from people in the major religious and spiritual traditions, Buddhist monks writing to me from around the world saying, "Well, this technique does what we've been trying to do for hundreds of years, and it does it a lot quicker than we thought we could do it." So these would be techniques like the one that I call ascending states, that I first of all found in the work of Jiddu Krishnamurti, or techniques like the unanswerable question, which is a technique similar to the Zen koan kind of technique, where you ask a question, the answering of which takes a person beyond their usual experience. Well, I had a background as a registered nurse, and so I was interested in checking how does the research into the brain relate to what we've been teaching in NLP. Basically, what I've been finding is that the brain research in the last 10 years is supporting all of the things that NLP was saying 30 or 40 years ago. And that actually includes the work that I was doing modelling spirituality, because we now know how the brain is structured in order to experience the universe as a unitary experience, and that it takes a very specialised module in the brain to break that experience up into what we think of as ordinary consciousness. So there's a link between the most profound experiences that humans have and the most detailed, precise results of science. So I think that that's a field that will deliver new techniques to NLP as well as people research more about what happens in the brain. And I'd like to get you to stand so that you have, I realise that that's a challenge in this room, so that you have a little space around you. You want to have some space behind you as well. So yeah, come out and use as much of the space here as we can. Okay. So now
Can you hear at the back at least? Is that, yep, good. Now, what I'm going to invite you to do in a moment is an activity that involves keeping your feet in the same place through the activity. Yep, and just on the end of your legs there. And I'm going to get you to take your left hand. This is my right hand, I do know what I'm doing, but I'm going to get you to take your left hand in a moment, and I'm going to get you to turn around with it. Now, I mentioned already that I have some training as a nurse. I'm not planning to use my nursing training here this evening. I'm more going to do the teaching stuff. So what I would like for you to do is be careful, please, when you turn around, because there are other people around you, first of all, and also be careful because at a certain point it will get tight, and I'm aiming for you just to find out where that is. So just take care of it and lift up your hand in front of you and watching where there are other people. If you need to go above, or you can't really go below their head, but if you turn around, your aim is to find out where does your hand get tight. So just go right ahead and turn around and see where is it, that place where it gets tight, and see what you're pointing at or who you're pointing at when it gets tight. Okay, you got that idea? Now, come back to the front, and now I mentioned, again, one of my other trainings, of course, is that I'm a member of the Association of Psychotherapists in New Zealand here, and some people say, oh, so you're a psychotherapist, I guess that means you stop people imagining stuff, and actually, no, I got bored with that years ago. What I'm into now is getting people to imagine more things, but more interesting things. So I'm going to get you to imagine something now. I'm going to get you to imagine that when you turned around, your hand went about 10 centimetres further than it did that first time. You imagine that? That's fairly easy. You'd be pointing maybe across at another person's head or whatever it is. And if you can imagine 10 centimetres, of course you can imagine 30 centimetres, which for people in my generation is about a foot. And so imagine that you went 30 centimetres further. And imagine that your body just flowed around 30 centimetres further. It was easy to go 30 centimetres further. And what would you be saying to yourself as you turned around 30 centimetres further? Because, by the way, in NLP terms, we have found out it's okay to talk to yourself. It seems to be okay to talk back as well. It's just that if anyone had a long-standing unresolved conflict in there, that it becomes a problem. In that case, it's just a matter of couples counselling. So, so check what would you be saying to yourself if you turned around 30 centimetres further than you did the first time, and it was easy to go that far. And then once you've imagined that, then what the heck, why not go a little further? Imagine that you turned around and you went 40, 50 centimetres further round, and it was easy, and your body just flowed around, right? And now what would you be saying to yourself? Would you be surprised, or would you be saying, oh, I knew some kind of NLP trick was going to happen? Or, so whatever you would, what I want you to do now is I want to take that same hand, get you to take that same hand and find out how far you go round now. Now that's kind of fun, isn't it? So, first of all, how many people went further? Good, I'm just checking your brain is working. Now, see, the interesting thing is, what did we do that got you to go further? Because what's interesting is not just that you went further, it's that it was easy to go past that place where it got tight. You know, when I'm working with someone, a sports person like Steve Gurney, of course I can't afford to show them how to achieve more and make it harder. They're already pushing their body as much as they can. What I'm interested in finding out is how to achieve more, but how to achieve it easier by knowing how to run your brain. See, when I got you to turn around, I got you to make a picture of what you'd see, you know, to imagine it. Some people say, well, I don't make pictures in my head, and you know, I'm always impressed how they found their way home last night because, you know, usually they don't have the address written down. They just kind of look at the houses and they recognise their one when they get to it, you know. And that kind of making pictures is all I mean. Not making pictures as real life. If people make pictures as real life, then they do give them pills for that. So I got you to make a picture in your head of what would happen if you turned around further. And then I got you to imagine what it would feel like physically in your body. If you remember this when I said it would feel easy to turn around. And then I got you to imagine even what would you say to yourself. Now the pictures in your head are made with the back of the brain here, the visual cortex. The feeling in your body is up here in the kinesthetic cortex. And on the sides here is the auditory piece where you talk to yourself and where you listen to sounds. So I had a whole set of areas of your brain activated at the same time, imagining what it would be like to go further. Now, think about this in terms of those goals that you have in your personal life, all the things you'd like to achieve. in your life? Do you do it this way? Do you make pictures in your mind of what it will be like, what you'll see when you achieve those things? Do you give yourself the feeling in your body that you would have if you achieved those things easily? Do you talk to yourself about what it's going to be like to do that? Because your brain is, of course, paying attention, and it treats these, doesn't it, as instructions. It follows your instructions. Here's another thought about that. Like, most of you as well have an idea how long you're going to live a long and healthy life. You know, sort of like, oh, well, I probably in my family, you know, and knowing how I am now, I'm probably going to live. And why not imagine it 10 years further on? Do you get the idea? Just see yourself healthy out there 10 years further on. Feel what it would feel like to be healthy at that age. Now, inside your brain, of course, you have lots of, you get a free brain when you come in. And you get lots of different areas in the brain, and I want to show you a little bit about the outside part of the brain. So there's actually, there's a piece on the back of the brain here that does pictures. It's the visual area of the brain. And there is a piece on the top of the brain that pays attention to body feelings. In NLP we call it kinesthetic, body sensations. And then there is a piece on each side of the brain that does sounds, it listens to sounds, the auditory area of the brain. And then there are actually some pieces that are on one side of the brain especially. I'm right-handed, so they're on the left part of my brain, and they deal specifically with language. So that are areas where when I'm talking to myself, which we've found out by the way is okay, it's okay to talk to yourself, it's even okay to answer back. It's just if there's a long-standing unresolved argument, then you really do need Goldman's help. So the language areas of the brain, they enable you to talk to yourself and understand what other people are saying to you as well and answer back. So they're very specific. Now usually when people turn around the first time, they're kind of listening to what I'm saying, and they may be functioning in one of these areas of the brain. But when you turned around the second time, I got you to imagine going further with each area. And it's like switching on all of the engines in the brain all at once. So as we switch on all the engines in the brain, of course, it's like flying an aeroplane with all its engines running. You get much more speed, and it's much easier to get the same result. So that's what we did. And of course, this is true for anything where you have a goal. You have lots of things you want to achieve in your life. You have lots of things you want to achieve by coming to this training. And what's really interesting is to think like, is this the way that you think about those goals? Like, do you talk to yourself about what it's going to be like to achieve them? Do you allow yourself to experience what is the feeling going to be like when I actually achieve that? Not just when I got there, but on the way around. What will it feel like to get there? You know, because we have a lot of research about people who achieve goals, and this is what they do. They do exactly what you just did. They feel what it's going to feel like to get there. They imagine what they're going to see as they get there. They imagine what they would say to themselves and what they would hear as that whole process is happening. And so the research about achieving goals comes from another person, and I'm going to tell you about later. His name's Richard Weissman. Richard Weissman did some research, and that was about 5 years ago now that he published this research. And what he did was he studied 5,000 people around the world who had really important life goals. So these 5,000 people got really important life goals, and he wanted to know, will they achieve them? So he asked them, and of course they were all confident they would achieve their goal. Well, he followed them up over the next year, and the first thing that he found was only 10% of them actually achieved their goal. And that's very interesting, because most people think they're going to achieve stuff. And when he asked the other people, the 90% who didn't achieve their goal, they had all sorts of ideas about it. They said, well, you know, it wasn't right for me, or the universe wasn't aligned correctly, you know, the stars and that. And, or I found out that it just wasn't my sort of thing. They had all sorts of explanations, you know, or, you know, it was the economy tanked, you know, that explained it. So, but actually, what Weissman found was that there was a difference in the thinking that the 90% did and the 10% did. And when we learn about goals, I want to show you that difference. So I want to show you what makes the difference between the 10% who were successful. Like, for example, there were a couple of things that the 90% who were unsuccessful did that the 10% didn't bother to do. So I can tell you that right now. Is that interesting? Like
the first thing is that the 90% who failed to reach their goal, they spend a lot of time each day thinking about how bad their problem was and how bad things had been before, and hoping that it won't turn out like that. So they put a lot of their kind of attention into thinking about what could go wrong and what was going wrong already. Now, this has become rather cool to understand. So most of you have heard this idea, right? That it's better to focus on what you want rather than think all day about what you don't want. So that's kind of obvious. The second thing the 90% did a lot of, that the 10% didn't really waste their time on, the 90% did a lot of fantasizing that everything's magically going to happen. It's really cool and it's just magic, and I'm going to be there and I won't have to do anything. It'll all work. And they fail. So this is a very important thing to understand, because this is not popular culture right now, as I speak. The popular theory promoted by a couple of DVDs and so on is that have been around and can buy in bookshops, is that the universe is kind of like a genie, and it just gives you stuff if you imagine. And it's not exactly true. From Richard Weissman's research, the opposite is true. The people who are successful didn't just imagine having something, they imagined getting there. Do you understand the difference? They didn't just imagine, poof, my arm's around there. They imagined what it would be like to flow easily around. They imagined doing everything that they would need to do. So I want to show you how to do that. I want to show you how to set goals in the way that the 10% actually do. If you know how to do that, then of course you can get that.
Okay, well, to answer that, let me just give you a little example of what we know from the research.
Yeah.
Because, again, 20 years ago, it would just be theory I was telling you. But we now have research on couples, for example, thousands and thousands of couples cross-culturally, and what we can do is we can watch 5 minutes of a couple talking, and we can predict with 96% certainty, will they be together in 12 years. We can predict with 80% certainty from that same 5 minutes of talking which year this couple will split up. So we're not just guessing.
So how? How can you predict in which year?
Yeah, by what we're talking about here, by the level of verbal abuse and the lack of synchronization between the two people. So what that means is that we can now give people useful advice if you want your relationships to last, if you want your relationships to last as well, which is crucial for companies' success. What exactly do you need to do in every 5 minutes?
So what can exactly we should do?
Well, the first thing to understand is that there is a very reliable pattern that happens in relationships that are not working. So I'll tell you that first.
So we are talking about the business relationship or any relationship?
Yes, both. And so firstly, what we find is that in both business and personal relationships, for people to stay together, the relationship needs to have a background of positivity. And by that I mean they need to say nice things about each other. And if they don't, then they end up just talking about problems, and the ratio should not be 1-to-1. In relationships that last, the ratio is 5-to-1. And that's enormous. So they say 5 nice things for every time they criticize another person.
5-to-1?
5-to-1.
5 nice things?
5 nice things. It seems mean,
Dr.
doesn't
Richard,
it?
does that
How can you
happen?
possibly say all that?
Does that happen? Please tell me.
Yeah, that does happen because it happens in the people who are going to be together 12 years down the line.
So this training I first ran about 30 years ago in Sarajevo. And at the time there had just been a significant war in Sarajevo, so in the Bosnia-Herzegovina area. So since then, I've run this training in a lot of different places, very often in places where there's some kind of crisis. And so this is a training that people can use in a crisis. The last situation that Yulia and I were teaching this was in Ukraine, online. And so we actually had, in the Ukraine there, we actually had people who were, our translator, in fact, there was the sound of machine gun fire in the background as she was translating everything. So it was kind of dramatic. People were down in bomb shelters, and their cities were being attacked around them. So that was the last place. Amazing. It's a very strange experience in the world today to be able to link with people through the internet, even in a situation like that.
We ran some parts of this training just recently as well, or some pieces of it we ran with people in Poland and Romania who are working with refugees coming out of that situation in Ukraine as well. So I've also run this training in various places in Israel, in Lebanon, after there was a huge explosion in the Beirut port there the other year, and that was online as well. It's been run in all sorts of other places. I ran it in Samoa. That's the only place where I ever had the Prime Minister of the country come to the training. So that's my big name drop. And I'd love to have Jacinda Ardern here as well, but for now, no, we don't have her here, so you can't tell her all the things you want to tell her, or ask her all the questions you want to ask her. But in Samoa we did, and that was after the tsunami in Samoa. So the tsunami hit the south coast of Samoa, and a lot of people were killed, and we ran this training there. In Japan, the same. There was a tsunami. You remember that there was a fairly dramatic series of events, and 20,000 people killed in the earthquake and tsunami. Piatigorsk is a place in Russia, and when I was running the training there, it was after there had been a terrorist attack at a village there called Beslan. And so Chechen people came into this village, and they captured all of the people in the school, and in the fight with the Russian army there was a massacre, and hundreds of children especially were killed. So these are pretty dramatic places to have run it. I also trained people when we had an earthquake here in New Zealand, in Christchurch, trained people to go down who were working in civil defence there. Of course, that means you're going to learn things from the real world. I can't afford to be teaching fluff in those kind of situations. I can't afford to be teaching something that's just a guess. So I'm going to show you some things that have very thorough research behind them. Firstly, for use in situations of crisis. Secondly, for preparing people when things are good. So resilience is not just about coping with bad stuff that happens. Resilience is about responding to life in a certain way, and responding in a way that makes it easier for you to manage crises, but that gives you a different perspective on what crises even are. In a sense, all life involves crises. I know that sounds like a heavy thing to say, but the first thing that happened to you on your way in here that was very dramatic was birth. And trust me, if you're a baby, birth is a crisis, let alone for your mum. So life has crises, and we don't usually think, well, boy, that was a tough thing, lucky I survived that. We usually think birth was pretty cool, because we got here, we arrived. And of course, people who are resilient, they respond to a lot of challenges like that. So the challenges of starting jobs, of starting relationships, sometimes of ending relationships, sometimes of leaving a job, all of those things could be experienced as actually positive kind of growth experiences, right? And life is continuously generating these discontinuities where something seemed to be going along and then suddenly something changed. So I want to show you how, from the research, people who are really effective at responding to those crises, those discontinuities, how they tend to respond. And I want to show you as well then some things. Tomorrow we're going to kind of focus in on what do you do if someone has had a crisis and they haven't responded to it in a way that's comfortable. So that means they have a traumatic response to the crisis. Now, there again, I'm going to show you things that have very, very thorough research behind them. I'm part of the NLP research team that has been organising for research, especially in the United States, looking at the NLP movie theatre technique. I think everyone here has heard of that technique. And I'm going to go through it tomorrow and show you some of the things that are new things they've learned about that technique. So with that technique, I'm just going to again show you a picture here of what the latest results from that research is. That's, by the way, that's me in Sarajevo, and now you look at it and you think, oh yeah, we see it every day in Ukraine, but at the time it was pretty shocking to me. I'd never been to a place where all the buildings were destroyed like this. I'd never been to a place where there are military vehicles continuously roaming down the street, and that certainly was kind of life-changing experience for me. But it was in a couple of ways. One was to realize that the skills that we have actually work in situations even like that. Now I'm just going to flick past this, and here we have the latest research. I'm hoping that you can see this on your screen there, and up the top here you can see these first 3 lines here. These are the research results from NLP processes that have been used with people who are military veterans who have had traumatic responses. And this is the change, the amount of change that they experience in a very measured kind of clinical research study. And down here are all of the other various techniques that have been attempted to be used with people who have post-traumatic stress responses. So these are cognitive behavioral techniques, so this was research that I did officially as part of my degree in archaeology and ancient history at the University of Leicester. So this meant that as part of my dissertation for that degree, I needed to present a proposal for research to the university, in particular to the ethics committee, who had to kind of review, was this a kind of valid thing for me to be researching, and who were the people that I was going to do it with, what would be the safety issues for them, things like that. Because it was a piece of research involving people, then there were also quite complex things to deal with about European Union and British rules about privacy. And so what I actually arranged to do was to do research on Yulia Kurasheva and my training in Cyprus, which is a 7-day training in which we do a whole lot of NLP processes. So the aim of all of these NLP processes, one way of describing what we're aiming to do there is to simulate the experience of people coming to the ancient sanctuary of Aphrodite Kypros, the goddess from Paphos, which is in western Cyprus. Cyprus is an island in the Mediterranean. And in particular, I was researching what had happened at that sanctuary there between 750 and 500 BCE. So that is 2,500 years ago, and at a time before classical Greek civilization. And I wanted to evaluate what would it have been like for people who actually came and had the experiences that we could find out from archaeology they would have at that sanctuary. And I decided to do this because I discovered in researching the sanctuary that what was done there was very, very similar to what we would do at an NLP and spirituality training, at an integration training. So the experience involved some use of medicinal essential oils, cinnamon, myrrh, frankincense, these kinds of oils, and these have a mild effect on the brain. So in particular, if you do other things that generate positive chemicals in the body, these oils stop the body over quickly metabolizing those feel-good chemicals. So they help the person maintain what you might call an altered state of consciousness. So we also do, on that training, we also do shamanic rituals with imaginary journeying and with drumming sound. We do a lot of Qigong movements, traditional Chinese exercise movements. We do action previous to this, and we think that the sanctuary of Aphrodite in Cyprus was actually originally a Minoan style cult. So they have the same symbolism around the cult there. And an archaeologist called Christine Morris did some research in Crete on the Minoan cult activity, and she had identified these statues of goddesses with their arms held up, things like that. These are not images of just of a goddess. They're not images even of people praying to a goddess. They are images of people doing physical activities, and sometimes we see them swaying and dancing, and so they're doing the same kind of things that we would do physically on our training. So she realized, Christine Morris had realized, that these people are getting themselves into a trance-like state doing these exercises, that they may be using other chemicals to enhance that state, other types of experience that would enhance that state. And really, I wanted to follow up on this, and in order to evaluate was it having any effect, I decided to use what's called the Hood's Mysticism Scale. So the Hood's Mysticism Scale was developed obviously by Mr. Hood, and it's a series of 32 questions that you ask people, and you ask them to grade their experience over a certain time. So this scale has been used a lot before, and that means that I can compare my results with other people's results. The scale gives an assessment of how different to ordinary experience has this been for people. So it's a whole lot of questions like, have you ever had an experience where you felt you were at one with everything? That's one of the questions, for example, and you kind of rate it from absolutely not to completely had that experience. And so then all the results are added up, and they're converted into a ratio, where a ratio of 1 would mean that the person had experienced all of these things to the max, and a ratio of 0.2 would mean that they had never had such an experience. Now, in the normal population over their lifetime, if we ask normal people this, have you had this kind of experience, all 32 questions, then we get a ratio for men of 0.683 and a ratio for women of 0.746. So that means that they kind of report that over their entire lifetime, they have had, about 2/3 to 3/4 of the experiences described. And so they've had times when they felt a sense of awe, a sense of bliss, a sense of being one with everything. Now, the research scale has also been used with people on a specific, like one experience. And when it's used on the experience of taking psilocybin, which is a standard hallucinogenic mushroom, then extract from mushroom, then the ratio from that experience itself, so you just say, over this experience, have you had this, this, and this? The ratio averages 0.875, which is way higher than usual for the whole lifetime, of course. So we had people agree at the start of the training. They signed a form giving permission to do this, to be part of this research and answer these questions afterwards. And we had them do all of the experiences and then fill out the Hood's Mysticism Scale and answer some questions after that, which obviously I then was using for qualitative research purposes. So in the quantitative research in the Hood Mysticism Scale, our result was even officially higher than the result for a 7-hour psilocybin experience. So to be fair, we took 7 days. So that was a lot more time for people to build up and have this experience in one or other of the processes that we did. There were only 12 people, so I would need to have lots of other people do this. I'd need to have someone else replicating the process, doing the same kind of experience somewhere else, in order to really show that this was a reliable result. But it is quite a good. It's quite a good pilot study, and interestingly, when I did ask people, so like what places were associated with this, and talk about the places that we went to, because we were doing this in the places where these ancient rituals happened sometimes. So on beautiful beaches in Cyprus and in sanctuaries where the ancient goddess had been worshipped, to use a modern term for that. The technique that people said was most strongly associated with these experiences was actually an NLP process that Yulia had developed called transcendence. And so that process was profoundly associated with these altered states of consciousness experiences.